All right, everybody, I'm super excited to finally be here sharing this with you. So, as soon as you watch this, you will know exactly what a counter argument is. We're finally on the last week of the essay. We've got 2 more paragraphs to do, and they are shorter paragraphs, but it's a skill that you don't practice a lot. So, we want to make sure you guys really understand what we're asking you to do before you actually do any writing. So, you should watch this before you open up that Google Slides. This is just the basics of what a counter argument is. So what makes an argument in the first place? It's always when there is more than one different point of view. So in this case, we're having 2 different points of view. For our essay that we're writing in this unit, it's about mercy killing. One point of view is that mercy killing is justified. A different point of view is that mercy killing is not justified. Those are our 2 different viewpoints. That's what qualifies this topic as an argument. This part of your writing, the counterargument, serves to acknowledge the opposite side of your claim and consider what those arguments may be. So when we write a counterargument, we're addressing the opposite side of what we're writing about. So everybody right now is currently writing that mercy killing is justified. For our counterargument, we are going to address the opposing viewpoint. Mercy killing is not justified. And we're just going to address it. We're not going to write a whole nother essay arguing the other side. We're just going to address and acknowledge it. Why do we acknowledge the other side? Why is that something you need to do? You're writing a perfectly good essay. Why do I need to bring in something else? Good writers always address opposing viewpoints. It shows strength and it shows confidence. If you are somebody who's arguing something and you refuse to acknowledge any other point of view, it makes you look a little scared. You don't want to talk about it because you think they might have something better to say. When we write argumentative essays, we always want to address the opposite side because that makes our writing stronger. For our purposes, you're going to consider one detail for your counterargument, and I want you to think about answering these questions. How will readers who feel differently from me respond to this? And what can I say back to them to make my argument clearer? Now, you guys are 8th graders, which means that more or less you are pretty good at arguing, at least pretty good at saying something back to somebody who steps to you. So think about the essay that we're writing. Think about the counter argument like that. Like somebody comes up to you, they say something. What do you say back? That's the whole process of a counter argument. We're going to practice. Scenario number 1. If you are making the case, and this is not what our essay is on, this is just an example. If you're making the case that cell phones in classrooms are disruptive because they will be constantly ringing, how might someone who is for cell phones in classrooms respond to this? And what might you say back to them? So think about that right now in your mind. And you can pause your video if you want, you can write it down, but if you personally were trying to argue that cell phones should be allowed or should not be allowed in classrooms because they will always be ringing, how would somebody argue with you? And what would you say after they argued with you? How would you come back and say, no, you're still wrong because of this? Scenario number 2, if you're making the case that cell phones in classrooms are beneficial or a good thing because students have instant access to research, how might someone who is against cell phones in classrooms respond to this? And what might you say back to them? So this scenario, we're addressing a different side, that cell phones in classrooms are a good thing because students have instant access to research. How would somebody argue with that point? And what will you say back to them? So let's go back to scenario 1. Cell phones in classrooms are disruptive because they will be constantly ringing. How might someone who is for cell phones in classroom respond to this? What might you say back to them? So your overall claim in that scenario is that schools should not allow cell phones in class because they would be disruptive. The counter argument. This is where we address the opposite view from our claim. Some people think schools should allow cell phones in class because some students are already illegally using them without causing disturbances. Now we need to come up with a solution to that argument. Here is our claim. We want to stick with that. We want to support this. Here's what some people might say in response to this or against it. Now we're going to come back and argue this point even further. However, the problem of classroom disruptions will escalate if students are freely allowed to have their cell phones in class because they will not feel like they are breaking the rules if it rings. So we have a claim, we have the opposite of that claim, an opposite argument of our original claim. Then we have a solution or rebuttal that directly supports our claim and argues with the counter argument. So it's like we're arguing, it's like a back and forth exchange. Schools should not allow cell phones in class because they would be disruptive. Some people think they should be allowed in class because they're already being used. However, the problem of classroom disruptions will escalate if students are freely allowed to have their cell phones in class. That is the whole exchange of a counter argument. If we go back to scenario 1, where if you're making the case that scenario 2, if you're making the case that cell phones in classrooms are beneficial because students have instant access to research, now we need to come up with what a counter argument for this scenario would look like. For the overall claim in that scenario is that schools should allow cell phones in class because they would be beneficial. The counter argument, so the argument that is the opposite of our claim, some people think schools should not allow cell phones in class because some students won't be able to afford cell phones. Now we need to directly argue this while still supporting our claim. However, those that have them will be able to use them, which will provide more access to computers for those that do not have cell phones. So again, we've gone back and forth. Schools should allow cell phones because they would be a good thing. Some people think they shouldn't allow cell phones because some people won't be able to afford them. However, those that have them will be able to use them, which will provide more access to computers for those that do not have cell phones. So we have a claim, our original thing that we're arguing, a counter argument, which addresses and acknowledges the opposite point of view, and a solution or rebuttal, which supports our claim and directly refutes or argues with the original counter argument. Remember, your objective is to address the opposite viewpoint. Try to think of what someone would say if they were trying to argue with you. And you need to maintain a formal tone. So you're not talking casually like you would with your friends. Remember, it's still an academic paper. The next video will address how to actually write your counter argument for this essay, but we're not going to do a ton of that work for you. So if you need to review what a counter argument is, make sure you rewatch this video. You also have a Checking for Understanding Google form to take. Once you're done with all of that, you will be ready to move on.